Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back, everyone, to The Wilder Ride, where we are getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. Our opening season is we're looking at Young Frankenstein. I'm your co-host, Alan Sanders.
And I'm your other co-host, Walt Murray.
And it's our very particular pleasure to welcome a guest into studios today, someone who's going to actually help us with some of this medical stuff. We've got Dr. Tim Ryan. Welcome.
Well, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a physician, family practice. Went to medical school 30 years ago and took anatomy.
Well, then we've got the perfect person.
We have the perfect
I hope I can contribute.
Oh, we've got some questions for you, sir.
We're already contributing, and we're not qualified, so you're in good company, no matter what.
No qualifications.
No qualifications necessary. In all honesty, this is a scene where we are actually attending or walking into a lecture. This is perhaps something that you can identify with, a typical med student classroom where they're talking about brain function and nervous systems and the reactions of people. Did you ever have a class similar to this kind of a setting?
In a lot of ways, it's similar, yeah. I think they recreated a classroom really well. Got a lot of guys sitting around with white coats and a somewhat dry lecturer up there, and yeah, real similar.
Now, would that be typical, though, wearing lab coats? Would the students have lab coats? Or is that
Depends on the year. Not really, but sometimes you would have your lab coats on because it would be clinical rotations and you'd pop in for a lecture and
so these guys might actually be interning or maybe doing some of their,
I think it's a medical school, so prior to being an intern, yeah.
Prior to being an intern.
First few years of medical school would be my guess.
Now, Doc, I got to ask you this. When you were back in medical school, did they ever find, the homeless geriatric patient to be a guinea pig in the classroom?
I never saw a man like that in our classroom, no. They would sometimes bring a student up, volunteer student come up and do some exam on them, but that's about it.
So now I got to ask you this too then. So when you had a chance to look at the scene, we gave you ahead of time your homework assignment, which thank you for taking on this project with us. What were your thoughts when you saw this guy rolling himself off the gurney to be a demonstration to these students?
Black humor. It's hilarious. I mean, it resonates with I think a lot of doctors would watch this scene and laugh really hard.
Excellent. Walt, now let's for the layman in the audience, what was your thought? Because I've never been to medical school. I've never, until Dr. Ryan here, I've never really known a whole lot of doctors on a personal level, so I had no chance to really say, well, what was it like going to medical school? I look at this scene and go, does this really happen?
Well, if my doctor listens to this, he'll probably be relieved to hear me say this, that I've never asked my doctor what he thought about this scene. But this is one of my favorite scenes in this movie. You've got this old man who, please hop down off this table. He kind of figures out how to slowly get himself off the table. And then, of course, one of the greatest lines of the movie where, Dr. Frankenstein at this point just says, nice hopping. And the guy almost falls off the table. And the actor who plays Mr. Hilltop is Liam Dunn, who we know from Blazing Saddles as Reverend Johnson. He's been in Silent Movie. He even played Gus on a couple episodes of Sanford and Son. So,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah. So this guy's been around. I mean, when I saw him rewatching this the other day, I was like, wait a minute, this guy's been on a whole bunch of stuff. I've always been distracted by how great this scene is.
You know what's funny though about this guy? He actually did not start as an actor.
No, he didn't. He did not.
No, Liam Dunn was a casting director. He was in Hollywood helping to find people to fill roles for particular movies. But I guess just being involved in some of these, and people saw that he had kind of he had a knack for comedy, especially doing some physical things, and found himself on camera.
Yeah, and when he was in Blazing Saddles, I mean, Reverend Johnson is an awesome part, and he just kills it in there. And then seeing him, I mean, this is a very, very different character. Like you said, it's almost like grabbing a homeless person off the street and bringing him in to do this.
No, Reverend Johnson, first of all, Blazing Saddles, we've established from previous episodes, is my favorite Mel Brooks movie of all time. That is my top of the line. And I always see this old guy giving the sermon, and when he's trying to, at one point when he holds the Bible up, everybody wants to shoot Sheriff Bart. And he's like, heed this good book and what it says. And they shoot the Bible. He's like, son, you're on your own. And so to not even hear him talk in this movie at all.
No.
And to look so pathetic and pitiful after being this, fiery preacher in front of this old frontier town church congregation.
Yeah, and he's in the robe, and he's got these wiry, muscle-free legs, and
he's very, very spindly.
Very spindly.
When you went to medical school, Doc, did they use a gong to call in? Did you have that on the desk? Does it ring the gong and bring in the victim?
No gong, but I will just say, watching it, they went to a classroom and took some elements of it and put it in the film. You can tell, the attitude of the lecturer, and he's so serious, and he slowly rings that gong and brings in the patient, and it's funny.
Now, what do you think the point of Dr. Frankenstein's character of saying, I have had no prior knowledge or conversation with this patient? From your perspective, Doc, why would you think that's an important line for this scene?
I gather he's trying to prove to his classroom that this reflex theory of his really works.
That it's not.
He's trying to say,
actor.
It's not an actor. I didn't tell him to act this way. This is a true reflex. That was my take on it.
I don't know. I'm so caught in the comedy of this scene that
it is hard because we've got it looping here, and I almost need to pause it because I keep cracking up every time I see him waddle off the table.
Well, and me, I kind of have a little bit of that sarcastic side to me, and I just think
Wait a minute. That's our third breaking news flash in a row on this episode. I'm going to have to get a sounder.
I know. I'm such a different person in real life than I am on this
breaking
show.
News, you didn't go to medical school. I
did not.
Didn't do well in school.
I survived college.
You survived, though. All right. I interrupted
but
your flow.
The thing with the gong is so funny because I had noticed it sitting there on the table. I'm like, why does he have a gong? And then he gongs to get the two well-dressed, big, burly guys to bring in Mr. Hilltop, which you could have basically had a fan push the table in, as light and thin as he is. But it's so arrogant, I guess, to have him just kind of ring that gong and have those guys bring him in. It's just an oddball, funny thing.
Now, something I want to point out, because I do pay attention to production design, but I also look at camera position and composition. Almost every time we've seen the gong on the desk in the framing it's exactly in the crotch area of the skeleton hanging behind him.
I hadn't noticed that.
And isn't it funny that after banging the gong, we're going to bang this guy's gongs here in just a minute?
We definitely are. We really are.
Did you notice that?
I did not notice that. That is really a hilarious set.
All right, Doc, let's talk about what this particular demonstration is. We see it written on the board about voluntary versus reflex actions. From a medical perspective, what's he talking about?
Well, it's true. We have reflex action. Like, you go to the doctor and they hit your knee with the reflex hammer. That's a reflex. Your brain's not involved. It's just a reflex arc, very quick. You can't really control it. It just happens.
It just happens. So it truly is an involuntary reaction.
That's right.
And is this, when he describes what the process is here, is it medically accurate?
Yeah. Now this fellow's reflex, it's a little complicated. I mean, his head, his arms, his legs, everything's involved. So, I mean, a little...
Yeah, coming up in the next minute, we're going to see exactly.
Not exactly, probably precisely a true reflex arc, but yeah, pretty close.
I know we didn't have you in with the earlier minutes of this week, but he was doing a lot of discussion about the parts of the brain. If you separate the lobes, you see the pons area, you see the
medulla oblongata.
Yeah, the medulla oblongata.
Yeah.
And moving down to the brain stem into eventually the spinal cord. When you were listening to that, because we had a younger guy in here earlier this week who was like, yeah, I just kind of glossed over it. I just felt like it was just gibberish. I just kept watching instead of listening. But from a medical perspective, was it fairly accurate?
Totally accurate. I even broke up my anatomy book. Yeah, his description is perfectly accurate. Brain stem anatomy. Yep.
So this goes to what I think we were talking about, Walt. They wanted to really establish that this guy is a true scientist. He's a true doctor. Mm-hmm. He's not some kook like he says about his grandfather. He doesn't want to be associated with any of the shenanigans of his family history.
Yeah, he wants to be known as a pure scientist, a pure man of medicine.
All right, so doctor, when we were talking about this happening, did you ever have anything? You said usually it's a medical student. Can you give us an example of something like you attended where they had a guinea pig for the classroom?
Yeah, like this, very similar. I remember a neurologist would give a neurology lecture and bring a student up front and show us the reflexes.
So you had one almost exactly like this?
Yeah.
Reflex
yes,
action.
yeah. There was a lecture really on neurology and showing how all the cranial nerves work and the muscles work, and it hit the students' reflexes and teach us that. Yeah, I remember it.
Really funny.
Yeah.
That's
I think
wild.
they did the research because, some liberty, obviously, but the minute before with this sort of a brainy kid speaking up and asking him the wise guy question, I mean, it's just like medical school. You always got one in the class that does that, and then the professor saying very seriously, Frankenstein, arrogantly, and they obviously did some research and went to probably some medical school classes. And
Okay, well, that's actually a really good point because we were figuring, how smart is this kid to challenge a teacher? But you that
yeah, I mean, there's always one guy in every class. Most of us would sit there really intimidated and quiet, and you can see them all sitting around with their notepads, sort of staring at the professor, and then the one guy raises his hand, Dr. Frankenstein,
That's
So-
Frankenstein.
I don't. Yeah, one of us even made the comment in the last minute of who does that? Because it's like, well, don't you want to pass this class? I mean, don't you want to get an A?
I thought it was accurate.
Wow, I'm getting a newfound respect for these early minutes.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so you don't have to name the person, but there really was somebody in your class who you were like, oh yeah, that's just like.
Yeah, I mean, you've all been in classes
Brady
like that.
Smurf gonna have to pipe up once again, show us how smart he is.
But I
Yes.
wouldn't expect that in med school. I mean, I expected it. I mean, I've got some graduate work behind me, but I wouldn't have really expected that out of med school because
I think so, yes.
that is hilarious.
Who knows? Maybe I missed my calling. I could
Yeah,
have taken my smart
maybe.
aleck personality down the road.
Yeah, you'd have been
To the
that guy.
lecture
He'd been
circuit.
like, yeah, it was Alan.
Yeah, I would have totally gotten.
That was
out
the
of
guy. Yeah.
I would have been brought up for the next guinea pig.
Yeah.
Okay, funny guy, come on up here. Let's have a little conversation.
Yeah, and he'd be going, yeah, I remember him. He was in med school, but he's a DJ now.
He's a DJ. He's a DJ. I don't go to parties and weddings. I don't do requests. All right, but as we start to wind down this minute, Doc, anything that you want to add from your background in medicine that I know you've said it's very accurate, but anything that because you also said you found yourself laughing having not really seen this movie before.
I thought it was funny. It really tickled my funny bone. It's got elements of truth to it, very much so. Now, most of the time, medical school is serious. And so that's why something humorous like this that pokes fun of the professor and the students, it's neat.
So, and I purposely, when I asked you about being involved with this, you had said, well, I don't really know the movie. I don't know much about Gene Wilder. I mean, you weren't really hopping like, woohoo, I'm a fan.
Uh-huh.
What do you think now? Is this a movie you'd like to kind of watch through to the end?
I may watch a little more of it, yeah. I do want to watch it, yeah. It looks pretty good.
There are some scenes later that I think you would, you're really going to love him or you're really going to hate him.
I think that's like almost any Mel Brooks movie.
Yeah, I think so.
You're either a super huge fan or you're just like, oh, it's the worst thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, when he melts down later, you're going to.
Yeah, he does. He has his own little personal breakdown.
Okay.
It's fun, and it's fun to watch.
But it's what you would expect from a
Mel
Frankenstein
Brooks.
movie.
Yeah, I think so. What's really neat, and since we've only got the doc, you're going to come back again tomorrow, so we'll have you for one more day. What I thought was interesting researching this, if you ever remember the old Boris Karloff 1931 Frankenstein, the equipment in the lab is the exact same equipment. Mel Brooks found the guy, and the guy that had designed all this equipment that was never credited, never got any screen credit back in the Universal Monster Picture days. Mel Brooks said, if you let me borrow that lab equipment, you'll get screen credit. That was Ken Strickfaden. And so all the equipment is the exact same equipment used in the 1931 Frankenstein.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah, and they say in the book about this movie that they actually plugged it in his garage. It had all the electrical stuff going.
Everything was arcing.
And they were freaking out, and they're like, this is amazing. So I can only imagine what that must have been
Think
like.
about it, he built all that in 1930.
Yeah.
And it sat in his garage for basically 43 years.
That is amazing.
And here we are 44 years later after the movie came out, analyzing this movie 1 minute at a time.
Well, and what you've said, Dr. Ryan, about how they really did go to some lengths here to make it accurate. It really speaks to where the lengths they went to in this movie to get the science on the nose. So that it really is kind of cool.
No, I'm actually finding myself more impressed about the early, not only writing, but directing and staging of the movie. Because once we get to Transylvania, it's like the cart's off the rails at that point.
Yeah.
But to establish the science and to be as accurate as what we're hearing, to be that again, we've got a doctor in studio who said, yeah, we had a lecture similar to this. The difference was it wasn't an old guy who had a hard time getting off the gurney, but you had a demonstration.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
All right, if you had to tell a funny medical school story, do you have any that you tell at parties?
I don't. I'm on the spot. I mean, medical school was a blur to me. It was hard. It was difficult. So I don't have a lot of funny stories other than maybe the gross anatomy lab. I remember one time.
Is that just a redundant thing calling it gross anatomy? Does that actually mean something?
That's a serious time to go in the anatomy lab the first time and take that in. And I remember the anatomy professor was walking around and he was poking at the different bodies and cadavers, and he had a donut in his hand. And he would poke and he'd eat the donut. And he'd poke.
Wait, was he poking with the hand that had the
Yes! That's my point. So,
God.
there's formaldehyde and stuff. And I remember all of us going, what is he doing? That doesn't look right. That's really the only funny story I remember from medical school.
So when you look at, and this is getting a little bit off track, but when you look at shows like MASH and things like that, and they do have kind of that oddball sense of humor, some of it because of the horror of the things that they're seeing at the time. Mm-hmm. But I guess there is a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of, what do you call it, black humor or dark humor? A lot of that in medical school because it's emotionally difficult. So you kind of go to the other extreme and have this dark humor. So there's a lot of that going on, like in MASH.
Well, that's how I cope with life. I got to have a sense of humor. Otherwise, I'd be crying all the time.
Yeah, job I'm in is not unlike that.
All right. Doc, anything else you want to add about this minute? Anything we forgot to mention or that you saw?
Nope, I'll just say it's neat because it resonates with a real lecture. Now, the next one, maybe not so much.
Well, it goes off the rails a little bit.
But this one was funny. I enjoyed it.
Took a little liberty there.
So then we can get you back tomorrow. We'll have you in here to chat about the actual live demonstration.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, folks, we are at the end of minute number 8. I can't believe this, already in the middle of the week here, Wednesday. Let's remind everybody that this show kind of mirrors off of a couple of guys that we want to make sure get a special thank you. Adam and Brad of Gutterballs, that's gutterballs.tv, who were first to analyze a movie 1 minute at a time. And then Pete and Alex of the Star Wars Minute, StarWarsMinute.com, who created the daily format that we and probably almost 100 other now podcasts, all breaking down movies and franchises 1 minute at a time.
Yeah, we also want to thank the folks who are listening and starting to take part in this. Thank you for going to Facebook. Thank you for going to iTunes and liking us and giving us 5-star ratings. Y'all are amazing. It makes it so much fun for us to know that it's not just us sitting around a studio talking in a box to each other, but that there are folks out there who are really enjoying what we're doing. And thank you for taking the time to go out there, particularly to iTunes, giving us that 5-star rating and making a comment so that your voice is heard and your vote is counted. That makes it so much easier for other people who are looking for this, and then some people who stumble across it to find us.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Thanks for sharing, and I think you guys have found that Walt and I love to react and interact with you guys on social media, so whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, we even have a closed listeners group that if you really want to get into some heavier discussions rather than the public forum, you want to be in the closed group, come on by, fill out the application quickly, answer a couple of the questions. We just appreciate you guys interacting with us because it's really cool to hear your take on what's happening minute by minute in this movie of Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, and thanks for telling your friends. We really have a bunch of people coming on board with us that seem to be enjoying it as well.
And as we wrap up, don't forget thewilderride.com is our website. Links to everything, show episodes, description of our guests, link to our Patreon page. Heck, we're even an Amazon associate. We've got some links to give you if you haven't built up your Gene Wilder library. We've got some links out there to go get your Blu-ray versions of all of his movies and start really building that library. And remember, if you're going to set up a gong, set up in front of the crotch of your of your dangling skeleton.
Absolutely.
Nothing says a bong hit like in front of a bone guy.
Well, and it preserves the dignity,
of course,
of the skeleton.
That's because that's what this movie's all about.
Absolutely preserving her.
Until then, we will talk more with Dr. Frankenstein.
Frankenstein?
Frankenstein. Hey, I'm Brainy Smurf.